What if I told you that fairies, those enchanting otherworldly beings from myth, might actually be real? From tiny winged creatures spotted in English countrysides to glowing beings witnessed in forests, people around the world have reported sightings that are too strange to ignore. Could it be that fairies live among us, hidden just beyond the veil of everyday life? Let's dive into the most fascinating encounters that just might prove fairies exist. One of the most intriguing fairy sightings took place at Chimney Rock in North Carolina, where a professor and a local woman claimed to witness dozens of glowing, human-like beings flying around the mountainside. These radiant figures were dressed in white gowns resembling men, women, and even children as they hovered and glided through the air. The sight left the professor in disbelief, and word quickly spread among the townspeople. Many who visited the area afterward also reported similar experiences, with some interpreting these ethereal creatures as angels, while others firmly believed they were encountering real fairies. The story gained momentum, and for years, Chimney Rock became a hotspot for fairy sightings. The Fairy Investigation Society is a group dedicated to documenting encounters with fairies, and it was re-established in 2013 and has since gathered numerous fascinating reports. One particularly curious case came from the 1930s, when a woman claimed to have an extraordinary experience while drying her hair outdoors. While in a sunny spot near a forest, she suddenly felt an odd tugging sensation. When she reached up, she discovered a tiny, wrinkled creature tangled in her hair. The creature was described as being leaf-colored with skin resembling dead leaves, and it was far from the graceful, ethereal beings often depicted in folklore. To her surprise, the fairy, who was quite ugly, began complaining in a high-pitched voice, irritated by her presence in the forest. After a brief struggle to free itself, the creature disappeared as mysteriously as it had arrived, leaving the woman baffled by the whole experience. This very peculiar sighting is one of many collected by the Fairy Investigation Society, adding to the long-standing belief that fairies, in all their forms, might just be real. In Cornwall, England, Karen Kay, a well-known event organizer, has become something of an expert in the world of fairies, claiming regular telepathic communication with these elusive beings. According to Karen, fairies often present themselves as tiny flashing lights that dance around her, and she firmly believes that these are more than just figments of the imagination. In fact, she says that fairies have even influenced some of her major life decisions. For instance, they once guided her to organize a festival dedicated entirely to fairy enthusiasts, something she initially hesitated to do, fearing it would damage her professional reputation. However, the event turned out to be a success, which she attributes to the fairies themselves. Karen's interactions with these magical beings suggest that far from being mythical, fairies could be real and capable of subtle but meaningful communication with those who remain open to their presence. In 1913, three brothers from Farmersville, Texas, claimed to have had a bizarre encounter with what they believed to be a real fairy. While working on their family farm, the boys noticed their dogs barking furiously at something unusual. Upon investigating, they found a small green man standing only about 18 inches tall, wearing what appeared to be a green rubbery suit. This creature, with arms hanging stiffly at its sides, stood motionless as the boys watched in shock. Unfortunately, the encounter took a very tragic turn when the dogs attacked the little green man and just tore him apart. The boys were absolutely horrified, but remained adamant that what they saw was real, as the creature had blood and had human-like organs even. By the next day, however, all traces of the mysterious being had disappeared, leaving no evidence except the brothers' unwavering testimony and probably a little bit of trauma after witnessing that as well. This strange sighting continues to fuel debates about whether the creature could have been a fairy or something else entirely. In 1884, a mail cart driver on the Isle of Man had a rather strange and unforgettable encounter during his nightly rounds. As he made his way through the countryside, he was suddenly stopped by a troop of tiny beings. Fairies dressed in bright red and carrying little lanterns. To his astonishment, these fairies began mischievously throwing his mailbags out of the cart and dancing around them in circles. No matter how many times the driver tried to load the bags back onto the cart, the fairies would toss them out again as if playing some really strange game. This peculiar and frustrating interaction continued throughout the night, with the driver helplessly watching as the fairies danced and toyed with his mail. By the time the first light of day broke, the fairies vanished, leaving the driver exhausted and very confused by what he had just witnessed. He remained adamant about what had happened, convinced that these were not just figments of his imagination, but real fairies causing mischief in the night. In 1897, a woman named Mrs. G. Herbert had an encounter in Dartmoor, England that she would never forget. While out on an afternoon walk, she spotted a small man standing no more than 18 inches tall with a wizened face and a pointed hat. He looked like something straight out of a fairy tale, no pun intended, with his old-fashioned doublet and short knickers. The sight left her startled, and as quickly as she saw him, the little man disappeared. Many years later, as an adult, Mrs. Hebert had another strange experience while riding her horse across Dartmoor. Despite being in a familiar area, she suddenly found herself completely lost with no recognition of her surroundings. She immediately suspected the work of pixies, mischievous fairies known to confuse travelers. Remembering an old charm to break fairy magic, she turned her pockets inside out, and just like that, her sense of direction returned and she recognized the landmarks around her. These encounters left her convinced that the magical world of fairies was real and alive in the wilds of Dartmoor. In 1948, a man named Mr. E.J.A. Reynolds had a remarkable encounter while on a summer holiday in Horsham, England. At just 10 years old, he had ventured out one moonlit night to set rabbit traps, waiting patiently in the shadows to see if he would catch anything. But what he saw instead was something far more unexpected. A small, 18-inch man covered in hair emerged from a blackberry bush. The creature had a leathery face with a sharp nose and unusually long arms compared to the rest of its body. It seemed completely unaware of Reynolds' presence, giving the boy a perfect opportunity to observe this peculiar figure. After a brief moment, the little man stepped back into the bush, vanishing as mysteriously as he had appeared. When Reynolds told the couple he was staying with, they laughed it off, dismissing his sighting as a child's imagination. However, just a few days later, Reynolds had a second encounter. This time, while riding atop a double-decker bus through Horsham, he spotted the same hairy little man walking across a garden in broad daylight. Although the couple hadn't believed him before, Reynolds kept quiet this time, unsure of how others would react to seeing what he believed was a real-life fairy or mythical creature. In the 1970s, a group of farmers in Suffolk, England, experienced something out of the ordinary that would later become one of the most well-documented fairy sightings of the era. While working in the fields at dusk, the farmers noticed small, human-like creatures darting through the crops. These beings were about a foot tall, with wings that allowed them to move quickly and gracefully over the landscape. Although the sight was fleeting, the farmers were convinced that they had witnessed real fairies, describing them as agile and delicate with an undeniable presence. Despite the skepticism they faced from others in the community who dismissed the sightings as a trick of the light or imagination, the farmers remained steadfast in their account. They insisted that what they saw was real, adding their story to the growing collection of modern fairy encounters in England. In May 1977, Fate magazine, a publication dedicated to strange and unusual stories, shared a letter from Cynthia Montefiore detailing two remarkable encounters at her mother's home in Somerset, England. While in the garden one day, Cynthia was learning how to take rose cuttings from her mother when something extraordinary happened. Her mother suddenly gestured for silence and pointed to a rose bloom. To their astonishment, perched on the flower was a tiny, 15-centimeter tall, or about 6 inches, woman with delicate dragonfly-like wings. The figure, bathed in pale pink with long silver hair, held a small wand with a glowing tip which she pointed towards the center of the flower. For 2 minutes the women watched in awe as the fairy's wings beat rapidly, almost like a hummingbird's. Then, just as mysteriously as she appeared, the little being vanished, leaving the women speechless and forgetting all about their gardening lesson. A few days later, Cynthia had another strange encounter in the same garden. While reading beneath a tree, she noticed movement in front of her. Glancing up, she saw a sturdily built figure about 18 inches tall in a brown one-piece suit running across the lawn toward a young fir tree, where it disappeared. Startled, she quickly investigated the tree but found no trace of the figure. These mysterious sightings left Cynthia convinced she had seen real fairies. Another captivating fairy sighting took place in the peaceful English countryside, where two friends were out enjoying their natural surroundings. At first, they noticed a strange grayish shape in the distance, and as they focused on it, the shape began to morph, revealing two female figures with long, flowing dresses and wings. These ethereal beings seemed to radiate joy, and their laughter filled the air, echoing through nature like the gentle sound of a babbling brook or rustling leaves in the wind. The experience, although brief, felt deeply profound to the friends. They were convinced that they had encountered real fairies, beings whose very presence connected them to the mystical world of nature. The encounter left them in awe, further solidifying the belief that fairies are not just a part of folklore, but real entities that exist just beyond the veil of everyday life. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski. Vince has been your editor. Check out his links down below, alright? I'll see you guys again very, very soon. Goodbye!